"Excuse me, ma'am, are you really married?" The question caught Rachel off guard. "What do you mean?" she replied, puzzled. "I had hired a private investigator for a certain investigation," the person continued, their voice solemn. "From the report of that investigator, I heard an unexpected fact that left me unable to hide my shock. If my husband has been exploiting my frequent night shifts to have a sweet affair, I will never forgive him." Rachel, a nurse at a general hospital and a newlywed celebrating her first Christmas since marriage, reflected on her relationship with Daniel. They had met at a social gathering, bonded over their shared last name, and married after 4 years of dating. Daniel, 5 years her senior and a gentleman, worked as an area manager at a retail store, often traveling for business. With no children yet, Rachel took night shifts to earn extra income, enjoying more days off as a result. Their marriage, although relatively new, had been filled with trips and dates until Daniel's unexpected presence at home after one of Rachel's night shifts raised questions. "I'm home, huh? Daniel, you're not off today, are you?" Rachel asked as she walked through the door. Daniel, visibly uneasy, hesitated before responding. "Well, you see, I have a sudden business trip starting tomorrow. They gave me the day off today." Rachel felt a pang of disappointment at the news of Daniel's upcoming week-long trip. She had been looking forward to their rare consecutive holiday, hoping for a slow evening together. "If it's for work," she sighed, trying to mask her disappointment. With no other option, I shifted gears and decided to drive Daniel to the airport. The drive took about 2 hours, and his flight to the head office in New York was another 2 hours. After bidding Daniel farewell at the airport, a place I rarely visited, I took a leisurely stroll and had lunch at a nearby famous cafe before returning home. Exhausted, I collapsed on the sofa and noticed an unfamiliar envelope under the TV stand. It must have been something Daniel, who was supposed to be on a business trip, had left behind. Feeling a twinge of guilt, I opened the envelope and found an album filled with pictures of Daniel, an unknown woman, and a little girl, possibly around 5 years old, in front of a kindergarten classroom dressed in a school uniform. What on earth is this? My mind raced. Could Daniel be having an affair? And with a single mother? Unforgivable infidelity. The word echoed in my mind, prompting me to dial Daniel's office. I feigned casual conversation, subtly asking about his supposed trip. To my shock, they informed me that Daniel was on bereavement leave. Moreover, there were rarely any business trips from their branch to the head office. Confusion set in. Daniel had claimed he was away on business, but he was actually on bereavement leave. I hadn't heard anything about it. He had been lying to get time off work just to meet with the woman and child in those photos. That was the only conclusion I could draw. Determined, I began searching for a detective agency. After settling on one, I planned to visit the next day. Yet throughout it all, I couldn't shake the realization that Daniel had been deceiving me for the entire 4 years we'd been together, fabricating these supposed business trips. A profound emptiness washed over me. Perhaps from exhaustion, I eventually drifted off to sleep. When I woke, it was already 6 a.m. the next day. With an appointment set for 10 a.m. at the detective agency, I carefully packed the envelope I found into a larger bag to ensure it wouldn't crease. As the appointed time approached, I walked through the gates of the detective agency for the first time in my life. The words I had rehearsed flew out of my head the moment I opened the office door. Inside, I found a young detective, barely in his mid-20s, dressed casually like a college student. Seeing my surprise, he greeted me with a casual smile. "You think I'm an immature-looking detective, don't you?" he said, lightening the mood. "Oh no, I'm sorry," I replied quickly. This is my first time in a place like this. I'm a bit nervous." He chuckled softly and gestured for me to sit on the sofa, ready to hear my story after a brief exchange. I placed the album, which had ignited my suspicions of Daniel's infidelity, on the table. True to his profession, the detective swiftly began gathering necessary evidence, making coffee with practiced ease. He carefully examined a copy of the photograph showing Daniel, the woman, and the little girl in front of the school. "This is likely a significant clue," he remarked, pointing out the clearly visible name of the school. Without delay, he searched for the preschool online and placed a call from another room. I couldn't see how he obtained the information, but soon he returned with news. The little girl in the photo was indeed enrolled at that preschool, currently on a leave of absence. Located in New York, the investigation would be costly, but I was determined. Despite being a nurse, I had been investing in stocks and forex since adulthood, achieving reasonable returns. Now, I resolved to use these funds for the investigation. The detective estimated the trip's duration uncertain, depending on how quickly we could gather evidence. Yet beyond financial concerns, what drove me was the deep humiliation of being deceived by my husband. I was determined to gather proof at any cost. The detective speculated that once Daniel returned home, the little girl might also resume attending preschool. The next day, I went to work as usual, hiding my turmoil beneath a facade of normalcy. I carefully replaced the envelope and its contents exactly where I had found them. Soon after, I received a message from Daniel, who was supposed to be away for a week, informing me, "Sorry, my business trip is extended by 3 more days. I'll be back on Sunday." Following our plan, I contacted the detective on the day Daniel was scheduled to return home. The detective, eager to begin, flew to New York the next day to initiate the investigation. That evening, I received a surprising call from him, revealing an unexpected development. "During the preliminary investigation, we've uncovered something unexpected," the detective started. "What do you mean?" I asked, bewildered. "I'll be back tomorrow. Can we meet soon?" I responded, urgency in my voice. I visited the detective's office promptly after finishing my night shift the next day, consumed by thoughts of Daniel's possible infidelity. Was he cheating after all? I asked the detective as soon as I arrived. The detective hesitated before responding, his expression grave. "No, I think the situation might be even more serious." His words made me swallow hard. "What do you mean?" "Firstly, it appears true that your husband took bereavement leave from his company. But Mrs., are you sure you're really married to Daniel?" he asked, his tone cautious. "What are you implying?" "We officially registered our marriage 6 months ago," I protested. "In fact," the detective continued, "I followed Daniel and your daughter back from her kindergarten in New York and found their home. According to locals, Daniel has been living alone there for the past 4 years, only returning to New York a few times a year." The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt, leaving me speechless and struggling to comprehend what I had just heard. "I heard he stayed for about a week for his father-in-law's funeral in New York." "No way," I stammered, unable to find words. "Since you and Daniel originally had the same last name, it's hard to say anything definitive at this stage. But I would suggest checking at the city hall," the detective advised after I expressed my gratitude. Following his advice, I went straight to City Hall. There, I requested a copy of the residency certificate for my entire household. What I saw in the document stunned me. Only my name was listed. "No way, there must be some mistake," I exclaimed, feeling a surge of confusion. I appealed to the female City Hall staff member assisting me. She looked distressed as she replied, "Even if you say so, we couldn't find any record of your marriage." Desperate and near tears, I pleaded, "Please check again. My husband's name is Daniel." Despite my pleas, the staff member apologized repeatedly, her remorse genuine. Amidst my overwhelming confusion, I recalled the day we registered our marriage. It was a work day for me, but Daniel insisted it had to be done on that particular auspicious day. I had gone alone to the city hall to submit our marriage registration. Never did I imagine it hadn't been processed. Allowing tears to flow freely, my emotions gradually settled. I apologized and bowed my head before leaving City Hall. On my way home from my night shift, all I could think about was how exhausting everything had become. Drained, I fell asleep on the sofa, contemplating my next steps. When I woke up, Daniel was in the midst of preparing dinner. Seeing him like that reminded me of the woman and the girl in the photo. I was furious about being deceived, but I knew losing my composure now would hinder any action I could take. So I managed to suppress my emotions. From that day on, I put on a smile in front of Daniel. About a week after my visit to City Hall, I began considering how I could learn more about his real life and his wife. Daniel, often forgetful, had left his smartphone at home that day. Since I happened to be off, I thought about delivering it to him but decided to check his phone first. Normally, snooping on someone else's phone isn't appropriate, but given my mental state, I felt I had no other choice. Daniel sometimes voiced his passcode aloud while unlocking his phone, so it was easy to access. Among his contacts, I found a woman labeled with a girl's picture, the same one he always talked about as an icon. Without hesitation, I called her. After 3 rings, a calm and elegant voice answered, "Hello, who is this? Are you Mrs. Daniel Smith?" I asked directly. The woman sounded puzzled but replied, "Yes, I am. But who are you?" "I'm someone Daniel met during his work travels," I explained carefully. "It's hard for me to say this, but we are living together now. So there really is a woman he's been visiting." "I see," she responded calmly. "I was planning to visit my husband who lives there during the end-of-year holidays. Can we talk then?" I hadn't expected this turn of events but gladly accepted her generous offer. Around the same time, Daniel mentioned, "Sorry, but there's a reunion in my hometown this New Year's, so I'm going back home." I had been eagerly waiting for these words from Daniel. When he finally proposed the meeting, I immediately agreed. According to what his wife told me, Daniel's hometown was in the next town over. I had believed both his parents were deceased and that he had no relatives, but it turned out they were alive and well, residing nearby. With only a month left until the end of the year, I sought out a lawyer specializing in relationships, determined to thoroughly confront and punish Daniel. Until the day of our showdown, I continued to act normally around Daniel, though emotionally it was unbearable. Finally, 1 month later, the day arrived. I told Daniel I had a night shift starting on the 30th and left the house with a smile, wishing him a happy new year. I managed to arrange for vacation days from December 30th to January 2nd under the guise of work obligations. On the 30th, I stayed at a business hotel, and on the morning of the 31st, I met with Daniel's wife at our designated meeting place. There I saw an elegant woman, just as she appeared in the photos, Mary. She had married Daniel 6 years ago, and they had a 5-year-old daughter. After a brief introduction, Mary and I began to execute our plan. Mary had flown in from New York with her parents and daughter. After leaving her daughter with her mother and father in their hotel room, we headed to Daniel's family home. Mary had already spoken to Daniel's parents beforehand, so I was surprised when they greeted me with deep bows upon seeing me. As planned, on the evening of the 31st, Daniel opened the door to his parents' living room. "I'm home," he announced. "Welcome back." The woman who greeted him with a smile was not his mother, nor was it Mary. It was me. Daniel paled. "Why are you here?" he stammered. I faced Daniel calmly with a smile. "What's this? Weren't you married to me?" Daniel was stunned into silence. Before he could respond, Mary spoke up quietly. "What's the meaning of this, Daniel? We just had a baby and needed help from our parents. I asked you to work away from home, but behind our backs, you've been leading a double life and having an affair." Mary's words hung in the air, delivered with such certainty that for a moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. "I'm just glad we're on the same side now," I began, directing my anger at Daniel. "Every time you said you were going on a business trip, you were actually meeting with your family. You were married. Why did you approach me? Did you think you could deceive me? This is marriage fraud, you scum. When I asked your company about your business trips, they said you hardly ever go on them. What were you thinking? You have such a beautiful wife and an adorable daughter at home. I was such a fool to believe your lies." Confronted by both of us, Daniel's smirk suddenly broke into laughter. "I wonder how I was found out," he mocked. "Living a double life was fun, especially with Rachel working nights. It was easy to deceive you because we have the same last name, and you were mostly working nights." Upon hearing these callous words, Daniel's mother, who couldn't believe her son's deceit, gave him a punch in the face. I looked at Daniel sternly and continued, "Besides me, you had 3 other lovers, didn't you?" I thrust the incriminating photos at him. Startled, Daniel sputtered, "What is this? Are you stalking me? I'll sue you." "These are all pieces of evidence gathered by a private investigator I hired because I suspected you were having an affair," I retorted firmly. "We're going to make you pay damages to both Mary and me." As I spoke with resolve, Daniel collapsed to the floor, begging for mercy. "I'm sorry. Just spare me the damages. I'll continue my relationship with both of you. Just spare me the damages." I was speechless with disbelief. It seemed he was broke from spending too much on his other lovers. I didn't care anymore. Leaving Daniel's childhood home, I told him, "I don't even want to speak to you anymore. Let's handle the rest through our lawyers." Afterwards, I worked with my lawyer to file a claim for compensation on grounds of bigamy. I was grateful when the money was successfully recovered. Feeling guilty towards Mary, I offered her some of the compensation, but she refused. In fact, she thanked me for the evidence I provided, and we became friends. According to Mary, she collected compensation from Daniel's other girlfriend and ended her relationship with him. She made sure to secure her fair share of alimony and child support. It turned out one of his mistresses was a colleague, and Daniel was demoted at work, sent to a subsidiary company. At the new company, he was reportedly bossed around by a younger employee and cried every day. He couldn't quit his job because he needed the money to pay off the compensation. Meanwhile, I moved out of the house I had shared with Daniel, renting a place that suited me perfectly for living alone. I embraced a carefree life, visiting New York a few times a year and maintaining a friendship with Mary and her daughter. When I first met my son's fiancée, she wasted no time in delivering her cutting remarks. "Your father only finished middle school. Can you even find a job with such minimal qualifications?" She jeered, her laughter echoing through the room. Her father joined in, adding insult to injury with his own jibes. As if that wasn't enough, they made it clear I was not included in their meal plans, serving food only for themselves. The fiancée's mother, with a smirk plastered on her face, remarked, "I only cook for my family. I've never encountered such a ridiculous parent during a family introduction." I decided I wouldn't tolerate their disrespect any longer. "Feel free to say what you like," I retorted before swiftly exiting the restaurant. My name is Stephen Walker, 60 years old and father to Michael, a 25-year-old whose relationship with me is strained, to say the least. He hasn't set foot in my house in ages. I've often found myself grappling with regret over the way I raised him, especially considering it's what ultimately led to losing my beloved wife when Michael was still in elementary school. My wife had been fragile since childhood, and her passing at the tender age of 45 left a profound void in our lives. At her funeral, I paid no mind to the judgmental gazes of relatives. Grief enveloped me like a child in a daze. Michael, composed beyond his years, gently urged me, "Dad, it's heartbreaking, but we need to bid Mom farewell." Yet my sorrow seemed fleeting, confined to those somber moments. At that time, I was overseeing a real estate business inherited from my father. The day following my wife's funeral, I awoke to a flurry of client calls. Duty beckoned, loyal clients awaited, and Michael needed my sole care. Those calls jolted me back to reality, propelling me to my office. Simultaneously, I found myself immersed in school functions and PTA gatherings, shouldering the responsibilities once shared with my wife. It was an unsteady juggle. I alone struggled to balance work and school commitments. I made a swift decision to temporarily shutter my business, passing my clientele to another real estate agency to devote time to Michael. Yet, upon arriving at his school, I was met with a cold reception. Michael's glare pierced through me as he uttered, "Dad, I told you not to come." His words stung deeper when he pleaded, "Don't let anyone know you're my dad," leaving me feeling like a stranger in my own son's life. Even now, as I sport a Walker name tag during PTA activities, the reason behind Michael's sudden aloofness remains a puzzle. During one such event, my mother's innocent inquiry unraveled the truth. "Isn't that your father?" she questioned, oblivious to the tension. "What's he doing here on a weekday? Has he nothing else to occupy his time since your mother passed?" Michael, silent and crestfallen, bore the brunt of his classmates' ridicule. Desperate to shield him from further humiliation, I intervened, offering a feeble excuse about taking a break from work akin to their summer or winter recess. Yet Michael's vulnerability only served as fodder for his peers' mockery, leaving me grappling with a sense of helplessness. "Your dad's only job was pretending to take a break. Your family's poor. I'll share my lunch bread with you." Michael's classmates' taunts only fueled his growing resentment. "Damn you, Dad, your words just made me look even worse," he seethed. Helpless against the onslaught of mockery, I could only avert my gaze, my heart heavy with the weight of his pain. Countless tears were shed in solitude as I grappled with my own sense of inadequacy. As Michael entered middle school, he began drifting towards troubled company. Nights were spent at friends' homes or lingering in gas station parking lots until the early hours. In an era where cell phones were a luxury, his absence became increasingly alarming. With each passing day, he returned home less frequently, leaving me in the dark about his whereabouts and activities. All I could do was offer apologies when the school's calls came, reporting complaints from nearby gas stations. Whenever I visited Michael's school, I endured a barrage of insults from him and his unruly peers, who hurled derogatory names and empty cans my way. Michael's demeanor had turned increasingly volatile since entering middle school, leaving me terrified to even approach him, unsure of how he might react. Reflecting on my parenting during his elementary years, I wished I had handled things differently. Yet I was at a loss. What was the appropriate approach to address a child's unruly behavior? Communication with a teenager seemed like an insurmountable challenge, leaving me utterly bewildered. Michael's truancy and classroom disruptions escalated, with his academic performance plummeting to new lows. During the parent-teacher conference, the prospect of a private high school emerged as a beacon of hope. Relief washed over me knowing there was an alternative where Michael could thrive. Perhaps, I reasoned, a change in environment and peer group would temper his behavior. True to my hopes, Michael's transition to high school marked a turning point. He applied himself diligently, achieving modestly above-average grades and even securing admission to college. Yet despite his academic strides, his animosity towards me remained steadfast. Even as he progressed through high school and into college, Michael remained elusive, preferring the company of friends to returning home. Upon entering college, he embraced independent living in a dorm, financing his education through part-time work. His self-sufficiency was admirable, yet his demeanor towards me remained frosty. Even as he ventured into the workforce, the threshold of our home remained untouched by his presence. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, after years of silence, Michael reached out. "I found someone I want to marry," he declared abruptly over the phone, followed by the directive, "We're meeting at a fancy restaurant next Sunday at 2 p.m. Be there." His plans were laid out without the courtesy of inquiring about my availability. Caught off guard, I protested, "This is all too sudden," only to be met with indifference. "If you can't make it, don't bother," he retorted before abruptly ending the call, leaving me bewildered by his callous demeanor. Despite my conflicting emotions, I couldn't deny the bond I shared with my precious son, so for his sake, I complied with his summons and arrived promptly at the upscale restaurant as instructed. Upon my arrival, her parents greeted me with an air of hostility, demanding, "Who are you?" In a manner that caught me off guard. Irritated by their rudeness, I retorted, "You call me out of the blue and then ask who? Give me a break." Yet my frustration fell on deaf ears as they denied any involvement in summoning me, mirroring my son's cold demeanor. Meanwhile, Michael stood nearby, sporting a smug grin that set off warning bells in my mind. Though uncertain of his intentions, I cautiously proceeded into the restaurant, the air thick with unspoken tension. As I stood there, feeling like an unwelcome intruder, Michael redirected the conversation towards me, painting a less than flattering picture of my life. "This guy," he began, gesturing towards me, "dropped out of high school and has been idle since Mom passed away." I attempted to interject, urging him to reconsider the appropriateness of the discussion, but he remained steadfast in his narrative. To my dismay, Sarah joined in with mocking laughter, questioning the employability of someone with only a middle school education. Adding insult to injury, Sarah's father chimed in, applauding Michael's achievements in contrast to my perceived shortcomings. It was a humiliating moment, with Michael basking in the praise while I stood there, painfully aware of the disparagement directed towards me. Exhausted and disheartened, I was on the verge of walking out, ready to utter the words, "Say what you want, I'm out of here." But before I could speak, a waiter approached from behind me with the food, apologizing for the delay. It was a stark reminder that the meal had yet to arrive, a fact that had slipped my mind in the heat of the moment. Attempting to regain my composure, I resigned myself to eating what was in front of me and departing. However, my efforts were thwarted when the waiter brought out dishes only for Michael, Sarah, and her parents, apologizing for a reservation oversight. Sarah's mother, with a saccharine smile, dismissed my presence, declaring, "He's not part of our family, so please disregard him." The waiter, visibly uncomfortable, retreated just as my frustration reached its peak. Before I could react, Sarah's father intervened, his tone laced with disdain. "We have no interest in associating with a deadbeat high school dropout," he asserted, casting me out with a sharp dismissal. It was a bitter blow, hearing such words of rejection from those gathered around the table. That was the last straw. "Is education and job history all that matter to you?" I exclaimed, rising from my seat. "Seems like you folks are a bit out of touch with reality." With those words, I made my intent to leave abundantly clear. In response, Sarah's father delivered a cutting retort, emphasizing the importance of education and job history, particularly in his line of work at Bank of America. His condescending remarks stung, but I managed a parting comment as I exited the scene. "Impressive working at Bank of America," I murmured under my breath, though what I heard amidst the tension in the air. The following day, I made my way to Bank of America, where Sarah's father held his position. Despite being labeled a deadbeat by my son, his peers, and even my son's prospective in-laws, I must clarify that the title doesn't quite fit. Following my wife's passing, I opted for a temporary closure of the real estate business I managed. However, it's essential to note that this closure was not permanent. In the wake of my wife's demise, I pivoted my business towards online management, prioritizing my son's school commitments and PTA engagements. While operating a physical storefront, my clientele primarily consisted of local residents. However, transitioning to online management opened doors to a broader spectrum of clients, including those residing in rural areas miles away from the nearest train station, and even American expatriates. The internet served as a gateway to a wider market, allowing me to expand my property portfolio and cater to an extensive clientele. Running a real estate business online not only made my operations more efficient but also transformed distant aspirations into tangible realities. In addition to my real estate ventures, I also dabbled in stocks and investments as a personal hobby. Currently, I have $50 million deposited in Bank of America, where Sarah's father holds his position. Upon my arrival at the bank, I wasted no time in requesting a meeting with the branch manager to address the events of the previous day. I was informed by one of your employees that this bank operates on trusts founded upon educational background and work history. I explained, my disappointment evident. As a result of that statement, I've lost all faith in this institution. Could you please assist me with closing my account? The branch manager, visibly distraught, offered profuse apologies and guided me through the account closure process. On a separate note, there's an issue I nearly overlooked. An individual who has neglected to pay rent for the apartment I own for the past 2 years. I have been turning a blind eye to the issue, assuming leniency because he's my son, but enough was enough. I mailed him a notice demanding 2 years' worth of rent. 3 days later, I found myself face to face with Sarah's father and my son, both furious. "Why did you go behind my back and report me to the branch manager, Dad?" Michael accused, his tone seething with betrayal. Sarah's father chimed in, equally incensed, "And what's with that notice? If you're the manager, you should be covering for me." Exasperated, I replied, "I lost trust in the bank after discovering their practice of judging clients based on education and work history. Are you both panicking because of one person's comment? Do you have something to hide?" I turned to Michael, adding sternly, "Just because we're family doesn't mean you can shirk your responsibilities. Pay your own rent." Sarah's father interjected, "Your actions have caused a stir. I've received numerous complaints from other clients and my boss reprimanded me because of your antics. It's outrageous." "I haven't caused any trouble. I simply shared the situation in passing with my relatives and clients," I clarified with a gentle smile. My son retorted sharply, "Clients? What clients, Dad? You're just a deadbeat, aren't you?" I met his accusation with a calm rebuttal. "Do you think a deadbeat could afford to construct a substantial house in such a prime location and maintain this lifestyle? I've even undertaken recent renovations." My son's expression shifted to one of confusion as he exclaimed, "Ha? What do you mean? Did you go into debt or something? I'm really fed up with you." I took a hiatus from my real estate job for a period and transitioned to managing an online business, which I'm still involved in. How many times do I need to reiterate? I'm not a slacker, I stated firmly, watching as my son's complexion drained of color. "What? I had no idea. I thought you were only working part-time," he stammered in disbelief. Sarah's father erupted in anger. "You're quite the piece of work, hiding your occupation even from your own son." Annoyed by the accusation, I retorted, "Say whatever you want," as I shut the front door behind me, cutting off further discussion. Outside, their voices echoed in heated accusations, punctuated by threats of legal action and bitter resentment. "You've tarnished my reputation. I'll take you to court. I can't believe I've been deceived by my own father all this time. I won't stand for it." Their argument escalated into a cacophony of shouts, but after about 10 minutes of fervent protest, their voices gradually dwindled into silence. It seemed they had exhausted their anger, realizing the futility of their outbursts. I breathed a sigh of relief, assuming they would refrain from returning. However, just as the tranquility settled in, my son's enraged voice shattered the calm. "You deceitful liar! What are you still doing here?" I peered out the window to witness Sarah's father and my son defacing my front door with spray paint. "This can't be happening. What are they plotting? Just as I prepared to confront them, the wail of police sirens pierced the air, drawing closer by the second. Could it be that a concerned neighbor had alerted the authorities? My suspicions were confirmed when I stepped outside to find them both being apprehended by the police responding to a complaint from the neighborhood. There he is, that deceitful liar. I've lost all credibility at work because of him. Their accusations reverberated through the air as the police calmly escorted them into the patrol car, reassuringly stating, all right, we'll handle it from here." Suddenly noticing my presence, one of the officers approached me with an oddly cheerful demeanor. "Sir, would you mind accompanying us to provide your statement?" "Why me? But I suppose I'm the one wronged here. I'll spill the beans on all their deceitful antics," I replied, agreeing to go with them. Upon arrival at the police station, I presented the officers with footage from a security camera installed at my front door, capturing the entire commotion. "This is excellent evidence," exclaimed one of the officers, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. With the video in hand, my interrogation was swiftly concluded. Consequently, my son and Sarah's father received a stern warning from the police and were required to sign a restraining order, mandating that they maintain their distance from me. As it turned out, the entire neighborhood bore witness to their outrageous behavior. Word spread like wildfire, reaching even my son's workplace. A coworker who resided nearby couldn't contain the gossip, regaling the office with tales of Michael's arrest for vandalizing his own father's property. I was so taken aback that I captured the entire ordeal on video. The news of Michael's antics quickly spread throughout his workplace and among clients, resulting in his demotion by his employer. Determined to address the matter, I returned to Bank of America, where Sarah's father was employed. Upon presenting the manager with the security camera footage from my phone, his complexion drained of color. Subsequently, I learned that Sarah's father had been terminated from his position, and naturally, Sarah called off her engagement with Michael. Both Michael and Sarah's family relocated to a rural area, seeking refuge from the fallout of their actions. Rumor had it that Sarah's parents even took up part-time employment at a remote gas station operated by my brother. They were no good at it, couldn't grasp the basics of stocking shelves no matter how many times I showed them. Had to give them the boot right away. And word has it, nearby gas stations and farms did the same. According to my brother, it seems Sarah's parents can't hold down a steady job. They're bouncing around from one gig to another at gas stations and farms as a duo. Additionally, Sarah was known for showering her boyfriends, including my son, with lavish gifts like watches, and she ended up in debt because of it. The meager earnings her parents make from their part-time gigs reportedly go straight into clearing their daughter's debts, leaving it a mystery how they managed to make ends meet. It's been 5 years since then, and my son is now 30. It seems like he's made positive changes after experiencing kindness from the people in the small town he moved to. He approached me on a couple of occasions, offering sincere apologies. I realized I had been naive and immature, hastily labeling him as good for nothing without making an effort to understand his job. The weight of regret for my actions is something I can't apologize enough for. Observing the shift in my son's demeanor, I made the decision to allow him to move in with me. Now, he's employed at a company near my residence, and gradually, he's begun assisting me with my work as well. However, it's important to note that he's still inexperienced, and I'm cautious about placing complete trust in him. While I remain hesitant to delegate all my tasks to him, I intend to closely monitor his behavior and attitude towards work before making any further decisions. If he demonstrates a genuine transformation in his life, I might entertain the idea of entrusting him with my business. However, expressing this possibility directly to him could lead to impulsivity. He might eagerly respond with, "Seriously, I'll resign tomorrow," and act without careful consideration. For now, I'm living with my son, holding on to the hope that someday I'll feel secure enough to place my complete trust in him. Mom is struggling to get by on her pension, and we, who are still able to work, should lend her a hand, shouldn't we? During the discussion about inheritance following their father's passing, Billy, the second son, earnestly addresses his brother and sister-in-law. However, it appears his words didn't quite strike a chord with them. How about we consider that just because she's relying on her pension doesn't mean we're obligated to hand over our hard-earned money? Suggests Billy. Exactly. Is our mother-in-law expecting us to foot her bills? Adds his wife. Suddenly, the eldest son and his wife shoot me looks as though they've tasted something sour. a gaze not befitting of one's parents. Stop trying to sponge off us, it's becoming a nuisance. The pensioner should fend for herself, except for special occasions like weddings and funerals. Stay out of our affairs, they retort. Hey, that's enough, Billy interjects, but I find myself looking down, clenching my fists. Not only are they seemingly impatient for my husband's demise, but they're also griping about inheritance and have labeled me a freeloader. Perhaps I've raised Billy wrong. I can't endure it any longer. Yet I address the eldest son and his wife calmly. I understand your perspective. Let's sever our ties. My name is Catherine, and I'm turning 65 this year. I live with my retired husband, who is kind and supportive. Together, we've raised 2 children. Dan, our eldest son, and Billy, our second. Recently, we've considered renovating our aging home, hoping to live with Dan and his wife, Rebecca, once the renovations are complete. When I broached the topic with Dan over the phone, his reluctance was palpable. Living together? Spare me. Rebecca won't like it either, he retorted. But if we're investing in renovations for our shared benefit, shouldn't it also accommodate their needs? However, from the other end of the line, I could almost hear Rebecca scoff. Living together? That's utterly impossible. I see. Let's just drop this conversation, I said, feeling the weight of the eldest son and his wife's usual superiority complex and cold demeanor. After I hung up, I relayed Dan and the other's sentiments to my husband, exactly as they were. He wore a somewhat lonely expression but spoke up cheerfully. Can't be helped. Let's focus on making the renovations for our comfort in old age. Following that decision, our home was remodeled to our liking, transformed into a barrier-free space. Several months later, scheduled for a meal with both our sons and their wives, Billy and Anne, our second son, arrived first. Anne, always considerate, handed me a hostess gift and immediately offered to help in the kitchen. Mother-in-law, you're always so good at cooking, she praised. Oh, thank you. I'm grateful for your help, Anne, I replied. As we chatted, the eldest son and his wife arrived, plopping heavily onto the sofa and demanding tea. Observing me preparing it, Rebecca and Dan grumbled impatiently. They have no consideration, Rebecca complained. Exactly, we're guests here. Hurry up, Dan added. Just as I was about to serve them, Billy approached Dan quietly from the side. Dan, can't you at least do that much by yourself? He whispered. Shut up, Dan snapped back. At Dan's harsh words, I sighed inwardly. Billy and Anne were kind, yet even they faced Dan's overbearing attitude. However, we had called both siblings together for an important discussion. As dinner commenced, Dan, eating grumpily, broke the silence. Hey Dad, since you called us here, you must have some business. Spit it out. My husband looked at me, and I nodded slightly. The truth is, it has been found that I have lung cancer. Billy and Anne showed genuine surprise, while the expressions of the eldest son and his wife remained unchanged. Dad, cancer? What's the current situation? Starting next week, I'll be hospitalized, I began, the weight of my words heavy in the air. They told me the cancer has spread all over my body, and I've got about 6 months left. That can't be. Well, dreadful news, Dan muttered, almost as if it were someone else's burden. Rebecca chimed in, you can't beat age, right? My uncle quickly passed away from stomach cancer too. Thoughtless words pricked at me, and I couldn't help but raise my voice. Would you two just stop it? I interjected. It's fine, but... My husband's gentle voice calmed me down as he turned his attention to his children. I want you guys to look after your mother after I'm gone. Of course, Dad, we'll take care of Mom, so don't worry, the second son and his wife assured us firmly. Yes, please think about your own health, father-in-law, they added. However, the eldest son and his wife seemed disengaged, absorbed in their cell phones, not seeming to register their father's words at all. As the meal concluded, everyone began to depart. Since the eldest son and his wife left quickly, I stepped outside to see off the second son and his wife. Mom, I know it's tough, but hang in there. We'll also help, of course. Please let us know anything, Billy expressed sincerely. Thank you, Billy, I replied softly, touched by his kindness. With that heartfelt conversation, I bid farewell to the second son and his wife. My husband opted for palliative care over surgery and chemotherapy, so he was admitted to a hospice the following week. I began visiting the hospice almost daily with my second son and his wife driving me and assisting in my husband's care. However, no matter how much I reached out, the eldest son and his wife never made an appearance. Then, about 5 months later, my husband's condition took a turn for the worse. I called the eldest son and his wife, informing them that this might be the end. Reluctantly, they appeared, but Dan neither held his father's hand, nor uttered a word to him. Instead, they merely stared at my frail husband as though he were a repulsive sight. "We've shown our faces, isn't that enough? We have matters to attend to, so we'll be leaving now," the elder couple announced abruptly, exiting the hospital room not even 10 minutes after their arrival. As soon as they left, I noticed Rebecca grabbing her jacket. Hastily, I rushed after them. Approaching the staircase leading to the hallway, I saw them descending slowly, engrossed in their conversation and oblivious to my presence. "It really seems like Dad's time is near. Hey, what's going to happen to the inheritance when father-in-law is gone?" Dan smiled at Rebecca's question. "Dad was just a regular employee, but Mom and the rest have been living quite comfortably lately, haven't they? Maybe they've been investing in the stock market or something. We could probably expect a decent inheritance." "Haha," Rebecca chuckled. "Oh, I can't wait. I've been longing for an overseas trip. I also want to design my own handbag. All we can do now is wait for things to wrap up," Dan remarked. Listening to their conversation, tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't possibly bring myself to tell my husband about this. Unable to confront them, I silently returned to the hospital room. 2 weeks later, he passed away. I remained by his side for a long time, but it was Billy and his wife who offered me comfort, their support a solace in the midst of grief. I managed to hold myself together, and the funeral proceeded smoothly. After the service, with only family remaining, Dan, unable to contain his impatience, broached the topic of Dad's inheritance. "What the hell, Dan? We just laid Dad to rest today," Billy immediately reprimanded him, but Dan's glare silenced any further objections. "You, the second son, just shut up." With a firm gaze, I intervened. "We'll arrange a meeting to discuss the inheritance next week. For today, please just go home." At my words, the elder couple grunted and promptly left. The following week, the cheerful elder couple and the serious younger couple arrived at our home for the inheritance meeting. Facing them, I began, "Firstly, I should mention that your father's inheritance amounts to about $30,000. "What?" Dan exclaimed, visibly taken aback by the news. "I'd like to split this according to legal inheritance shares, with me taking half and each of you getting a quarter," I explained. "Wait, hold on. Are you sure there's only $30,000? Dan persisted, sensing something amiss in my tone. I handed him a thick envelope. "All the documents are in here. Please review them," I instructed. After inspecting the documents, Dan and Rebecca's faces twisted in frustration. "Damn, Dad was really strapped for cash, huh? So we're only getting $7,500 each. That's too little. If it's this low, give us the house too," Dan demanded, clearly dissatisfied. Billy's response was swift and angry. "Our mother still lives in that house. We won't give it up. It's because you wasted money on renovations that we're left with so little. If the inheritance is this small, the house stays with us," he declared firmly. Calmly, I addressed the irritated couple. "This house was painstakingly renovated by your father so we could live here in our old age. I won't just hand it over. I'll keep it as long as I live." "That's not fair. You can't keep everything to yourself," Dan protested, his fury evident. Billy intervened, restraining his brother. "Dad was concerned about Mom until the end. You might not understand it, Dan," he said softly, looking at me with concern. "We're going to announce our decision about the inheritance. Mom, you should take our side too." Dad would rest easy knowing that, Billy's wife added, nodding beside him. "If they won't share, we'll gladly take their part," Dan insisted. "That's impossible. Mom's living on her pension. It's tough. We who are working should be supporting her," Billy scolded his older brother and his wife sincerely, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. "Just because she's living on her pension doesn't mean we can give our money away," Dan retorted, unyielding. "Exactly. Perhaps mother-in-law was planning to siphon off our money from the beginning," Rebecca added, her tone accusatory. The elder couple looked at me with disdain, their expressions sour and disrespectful. "Stop acting like parasites. It's a nuisance. Elderly women living on pensions should keep out of everything except for weddings and funerals. Just stay quiet," Dan lashed out. "Hey, that's enough," Billy intervened, but I kept my head down, fists clenched. Not only were they wishing for my husband's death, but they also complained about the inheritance and even labeled me as a parasite. I couldn't help but wonder where I had gone wrong in raising him. Regret flooded my heart, and tears threatened to spill from my eyes. But I couldn't afford to lose my composure in this moment. Gathering my feelings, I addressed Dan and Rebecca calmly. I understand what you're saying. Let's sever our ties. At my words, the elder couple looked momentarily surprised before breaking into smirks. Really? That's the best news I've heard, they remarked sarcastically as Dan and Rebecca hurried to leave. Before storming out, they threw one last barb at Billy and his wife, tauntingly calling them to take care of the parasite. As the door closed behind them, Billy and his wife rushed over to me. Mom, are you okay? They're just too awful. We're always by your side. Please don't be upset, they comforted me. Still looking down, I raised my face and met their eyes. Billy and I have something to tell you, I began. A few months later, while relaxing at home, Dan and Rebecca unexpectedly appeared, accompanied by Billy. What's going on? We've severed our ties, haven't we? Dan demanded, his voice raised. Indeed, come on in. I invited them, ignoring their aggressive tone. As they entered, their faces flushed with anger. Billy spoke up with an apologetic tone. Sorry, Mom. When asked about the house, I couldn't help but invite them in. That's fine for now. Everyone please come in, I said, leading them inside. But as soon as the eldest couple stepped into the living room, they began to raise their voices. What do you mean you're giving the house to Billy? You're disregarding us, they protested. I maintained my composure and explained calmly, Billy has promised to maintain the house and preserve your father's memories. That's why I've decided to leave it to him. Dan stared at me, taken aback. What do you mean? He questioned. Billy and Anne have been a great support to me. It's only natural, I replied warmly, thanking them. We're not here to hear that. You said you'd take over the house yourself, didn't you? The eldest couple retorted. Glancing at the eldest daughter-in-law, who seemed ready to explode, I elaborated. I thought I'd hand it over to someone who would respect your father's and my wishes. Besides, I've started receiving some rental income. Their surprise evident, I continued matter-of-factly. Remember last year when my father, your grandfather, passed away? Billy attended the funeral, but you couldn't because you were out of town. Well, your grandfather was a landlord who owned several buildings and apartments. Finally, the inheritance has been settled, and I've started receiving rental income. The eldest couple's faces displayed shock. We never heard anything about that, they exclaimed. About that rental income, how much are we talking about? Dan inquired. It's about $3 million a year, so it's easy for me to give one of the houses to my adorable son and his wife, I revealed. At this, Dan and Rebecca sprang to their feet. Wait, hold on a minute. If Billy and his wife get one, then we should too, they argued. Why should I split my assets with someone who called me a parasite? Wasn't it you who told me to stay away? I shot back sharply. Caught off guard, Dan and Rebecca began to stutter in response. I fixed them with a stern glare and pointed to the door. All right, the conversation is over. Please go home now. Wait, hold on, Mom. Please listen to me. Deanna approached me, flustered, and suddenly clung to my arm. I looked at him coldly. You have no right to call me Mom. Please, you can't just demand a share of the house and money too. We're struggling, the eldest daughter-in-law pleaded loudly. I raised an eyebrow. Struggling? What do you mean? I demanded. Dan hesitated before starting to explain. We thought we'd received Dad's inheritance and lived a bit too luxuriously. We kind of got into debt, he confessed. I forcefully shook off Dan's arm, feeling a surge of disgust. I didn't think you could be this stupid. This is the bed you've made, so you need to lie in it, Dan, I retorted sharply. That's just too cruel, the eldest couple protested, their faces crestfallen. I had the final say. From now on, I'll transfer my assets to Billy while I'm still alive. I won't give a penny to you who cut ties with me. Please never bother us again. Billy stood up to the deflated eldest couple. If you understand, then go home quickly. Don't come near Mom or us ever again, he declared firmly, escorting them to the door. After that, the eldest couple apparently ended up going bankrupt from the debt they incurred. From their rundown apartment, you could hear Dan and Rebecca arguing night after night. For them, who couldn't manage this simple act of cherishing their family, a decent future probably isn't in the cards. As for me, since I passed the house on to Billy, I bought and moved into an apartment nearby that comes with caregiving services. Billy and his wife often come to visit, and they've recently had an adorable baby. I want to continue building a good relationship with Billy's family and cherish each and every day.